Okay, so last class we talked about monopolies profit maximization, and the main result can be summarized by this nice picture, right? So remember, it's a two-step process. First step, you would actually think about, oh boy. So first step, you would actually think about intersecting marginal cost curve with the marginal revenue curve. So let me find out the correct graph. Okay, so that's the first step here. Just find out the intersection between the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve. And then this intersection will give you the Qmax, which is the quantity maximizing this monopolist's profit. And then you will go upward, right? And finding out the point on the demand curve. So this is the demand curve. And this point will give you the monopoly price. And today we examine the welfare property of monopoly. That is, we want to understand whether the social welfare or the total welfare is maximized under monopoly. So what you can see here is, first, it's very easy to see that compared with the competitive firm, monopoly charges a price which is higher than the marginal cost. So what you can see here is this is the price, and this is the marginal cost. So you can see that price is larger than marginal cost. So this is a major difference. And very quickly you will see that this major difference drives the result, that is, monopoly is inefficient. Now we ask a very important question. That is, clearly the price is higher than marginal cost. So we want to ask, well, this might hurt consumers, but we want to ask whether the benefit to the firm can actually be larger than the cost imposed on consumers. The idea here is, if price is higher than the marginal cost, then price is potentially too high. But with a higher price, the monopolist can earn a higher profit, and with a higher price, consumer surplus will be lower. So we ask the trade-off, whether the increase in the monopolist profit will be larger than the decrease in the consumer surplus. And if you think about this question and compare this question to the results we have obtained in previous chapters, then you will actually understand that even monopolist has higher profit, this higher profit cannot compensate the loss from lower consumer surplus. The idea is like this. So if you look at the demand curve and the marginal cost curve, what you can see here is, let's say you're looking at a quantity here. So this is a quantity smaller than this so-called efficient quantity. So let me choose a different color. Oops, where's my file? Okay, it's here. So this is the so-called efficient quantity. Let's say you're looking at this quantity here. So obviously this is a quantity which is smaller than the efficient quantity. And now we look at two values. This one is the value to buyers, and this one is the value to sellers. Here, to be more specific, not value to sellers. This lower point represents the cost to the monopolist. So what you can see here is the willingness to pay, or the value to buyer, is larger than the cost, right? So essentially it means that for these quantities, right? For these quantities, value to buyer is always larger than the cost to the monopolist. So basically, if these quantities can be sold to buyers, then there should be some positive benefit, right? Because value is larger than the cost. And then if you look at this quantity, which is a quantity higher than the efficient quantity, here you're getting this opposite result. That is, the marginal cost or the cost to the monopolist is actually larger than the willingness to pay to buyers, right? Because the cost is here and the willingness to pay is here. So basically for these quantities, right, you can imagine that for these quantities, cost is larger than the benefit. So we are getting some negative benefit here. Obviously, negative benefit refers to some sort of loss. So in the end, you can see that this is the best quantity, right? You can see that at this quantity, marginal cost equals price. So this basically tells you that a very fundamental result. That is, if price equals marginal cost, then the market is efficient, right? At this point, you can see that price is given by this dashed line, right? So here at this intersection, price equals marginal cost. And then here, we are having a price which is higher, and this price is even higher than the marginal cost. And we know that if price is larger than the marginal cost, then the market outcome is inefficient. Similarly, if price is smaller than the marginal cost, and for this point, right, we get price, and then we have marginal cost, right? So now the market outcome is still inefficient. So to put it simply, the market is efficient if and only if price equals marginal cost. So this is actually a pretty useful result. So try to understand it and try to remember it. Again, the market is efficient if and only if market price equals marginal cost. Okay. Now, let's think about the deadweight loss under monopoly. Because we understand the market is efficient only if price equals marginal cost. And we know that for a monopolist, price is actually larger than marginal cost. So we understand there should be some kind of inefficiency, right? Now the question is, how could we measure this inefficiency? Well, you can see that this picture gives you the answer here. The inefficiency is given by this, what's the color here? This sort of pink triangle, right? This is the deadweight loss. Now, how do you get this result? Well, we can actually repeat the same process we have done from previous chapters. So let me show you how to find out. Okay. What? So let's say this section, right? So this little triangle, let's say this guy is called A. And then, yeah, maybe it's better to, you know what? Let me use a different color. So let's say this is A, and this middle rectangle is B, and then this blue triangle is C, and then the so-called deadweight loss triangle. Let me use maybe blue color. It's D. Okay. Now let's see the total surplus. Right? So it's very easy to see total surplus. So what I can see here is, so total surplus. Let's say we first look at total surplus if price equals marginal cost. Now, if price equals marginal cost, you can see that we're looking at this point here, right? So basically now total surplus is the total of consumer surplus and producer's surplus, which is A and B and C and D. Now we would look at total surplus under monopolist. Clearly, if the market is a monopoly market, we know that price has to be larger than marginal cost. And in this case, you can see that total surplus is given by A and B and C, right? Remember, total surplus is always the area between the demand curve and supply curve. And because the quantity is given by the monopoly quantity, so the area is given by A plus B plus C. So you can see that now the only difference is this guy, this triangle D. So that's why D here is the deadweight loss. Of course, you can do some exercise yourself. You can see that here to understand deadweight loss, I am only using total surplus. And this is actually enough to find out the deadweight loss. But if you have time, you can actually separate the total surplus into consumer surplus and producer's surplus. And you can see how consumer surplus changes and how producer's surplus changes under the monopolist market versus the competitive market when price equals marginal cost. Okay, let's see this quick quiz here. How does a monopolist quantity of output compare with the quantity of output that maximizes total surplus? So pretty much you can draw out this picture here, right? So basically, again, we start from the demand, and then we have the marginal revenue, and then we have the marginal cost. So after drawing these three lines, we can find out what is the Qmax, that is the quantity which maximizes the monopolist's profit. And then we go upward from the demand curve, we find out the P here. So what's the question here? It says, how does a monopolist quantity, right? Obviously, this is the monopolist quantity, compare with the quantity that maximizes total surplus. We learned if we want to maximize the total surplus, we want to make sure price equals marginal cost. And you can see that we can obtain this only at this point, right? So at this point, you can see that the quantity is here. So let's call this as maybe QE, right? So efficient quantity. Obviously, the answer is Qmax smaller than QE. Okay, now let's talk about a very interesting topic of price discrimination. So if you recall what we have discussed in this chapter until now, we actually always assumed the monopolist firm only charges one price. So it charges one price to every customer. But you can see that in reality, a monopoly firm is a price maker. So it has the freedom to sell the same product to different customers for different prices. And when this happens, it is called price discrimination. And you can also see that this kind of behavior, this price discrimination, is impossible in a competitive market, right? Why this is the case? Well, because the fundamental reason is in a competitive market, a competitive firm is a price taker. So it is not a price maker. And you can see that if the firm tries to sell the product for a higher price, then its customers will just go to other firms, right? So there's no way a competitive firm can price discriminate. Okay. Now let's see this very interesting story or example based on Amazon. So let's say Amazon exclusively sells J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter book as Kindle book, and the marginal cost of producing a digital book is almost zero, right? So let's assume here the marginal cost of production is just zero. And we also assume there are two kinds of readers. The first type is these are fans. So 100,000 fans, they would be happy to pay up to $30 for the book. And then we have the other type of people, right? These 400,000 non-fans, their willingness to pay to this book is only $5. So now let's say if you're the executive at Amazon and you're thinking about how to set price for selling this book, right? Basically, let's say you're the monopolist, right? So you're the only seller who can sell J.K. Rowling's book. So here you have two kinds of prices. You can sell at $30 or you can sell at $5. If you sell at $30, then this is essentially the willingness to pay for 100,000 fans. And you can see that non-fans will not buy your book. So the quantity you can sell is 100,000. In this case, your profit would be 3 million, right? Let's say now you would instead want to set a price of $5. So in this case, you will have both fans and non-fans to buy your book. So you can basically sell more copies, but you have to sell these copies at a much lower price. In this case, you will earn 5 times 500,000. So this gives you $2.5 million. Do you want to set other prices? Let's say if you want to, let's assume you want to set a price of 4. You will still sell 500,000 books, and your profit will be lower, right? So you will not want to set a price of 4. And you can see that in fact you will not want to set a price which is lower than 5. Now, do you want to sell a price which is higher than 30? You don't, because if you sell a price which is higher than 30, then you will sell nothing. So your profit is basically zero. Do you want to sell a price above 5 but below 30? You don't. Because if you set a price between 5 and 30, then you will still only be able to sell 100,000 books. And you can see that in this case, your profit is basically smaller than $3 million. So your only choices would be selling it at 30 or 5. But you can see that in this case, obviously, you will just want to sell at 30. This very high price, right? Because you have higher profit. Now, think about this. What is the deadweight loss if Amazon decides to set the price at $30? So to think about deadweight loss, we have to think about total surplus, right? So here we're only talking about profit, right? Clearly, profit is not equivalent to total surplus. So let's find out total surplus. Right? Okay. So let's see. If price is 30, you can see here the profit is $3 million and the consumer surplus is 0, right? Because price equals their willingness to pay. So here total surplus actually equals the firm's profit. So it's $3 million. Now, what about the other case? Oh, if price is 5, here you can see that the profit is $2 million. Now, what about the consumer surplus? Well, what you can see here is first, for these non-fans, at the price of 5, their consumer surplus is just 0. But for these non-fans, they do get some consumer surplus, right? To be more specific, you can see that their consumer surplus is given by, let me add consumer surplus here, is given by their willingness to pay minus 5, which is the price they actually pay, times the number of copies. So it's actually 100,000. Right? So this gives us 2.5 million. Now, what is the total surplus? So a profit of 2.5 plus a consumer surplus of 2.5. So this gives us 5 million. Now you can see that there is deadweight loss, right? So compared with setting a price of 5, setting a price of 30 only generates a total surplus of 3. So basically the deadweight loss here is $2 million, right? Okay, now we have this deadweight loss. The reason is because this is a monopolist, and it sets a quantity which is smaller than this efficient quantity. You can see that here, if Amazon sets a price of 30, it only sells 100 copies, right? 100,000 copies. But if it sets price at 5, it can sell 500,000 copies. And it is a 500,000 copies is a quantity which generates higher total surplus. So you can see that the quantity 100,000 is inefficiently low. Now let's think about a different scenario. Now let's say Amazon can charge different prices to different types of customers. In this, so now you can see that initially Amazon can only charge either 30 or 5. It cannot do both, right? So now we assume Amazon can actually do both. Now you can see the firm's optimal pricing strategy is very simple, right? It will just charge $30 to the fans, and it will charge $5 to non-fans. And you can see that in this case, Amazon will have a profit of $3 million from fans and $2 million from non-fans. And profit would be $5 million. Now you can see what is the total surplus here. Well, basically, for both type of buyers, Amazon is charging them willingness to pay. So their consumer surplus is 0. So total surplus equals the firm's profit, which is $5 million. So basically you can see that in this case, if the firm can use price discrimination, it can actually get higher profit. Not only the firm can get a higher profit, the total surplus, at least in this example, actually increases, right? And you can see that this is the true because in the beginning, the total surplus is only $3 million. And now the total surplus actually increases to $5 million. I have to caution that this kind of result is true because Amazon is actually doing this first degree discrimination. So this is not a universal result. That is, you cannot say price discrimination will always increase total surplus. This is not true. What I'm saying is it's only true, sorry, not only. It is true in this example, but it is not true in some other examples. Okay, so to summarize, from this example, you can see that price discrimination is a better strategy for a monopolist compared with charging one price. And then you can see that to effectively implement price discrimination, it is important for the firm to have the ability to separate its customers according to their willingness to pay, right? Because you can see that in this Amazon example, if Amazon wants to effectively set its price, it has to understand its customers' willingness to pay, right? Because these numbers are actually willingness to pay. And you can also see that price discrimination can actually increase economic welfare, right? Because we see that under price discrimination, the total surplus actually increases from 3 to 5. Okay. Now, let's formally talk about price discrimination. There are several different kinds of price discrimination, and we will start from the first degree. So obviously, you can imagine that after talking about first degree price discrimination, you can have second and third degree, right? First degree price discrimination is also called perfect price discrimination. So it means that the monopoly has perfect knowledge. What kind of perfect knowledge? Well, the monopolist knows exactly each buyer's willingness to pay. And the monopolist will charge exactly each buyer his willingness to pay. Now, let's think about welfare, with and without first degree price discrimination. So let's say we're having this basic case. We have a monopoly who uses a single price. So what you can see here is, well, it's very typical, right? You have this consumer surplus, which is given by this light blue triangle. And then you have the profit, which is given by this sort of gray colored triangle. And then you have this pink triangle. And this pink triangle gives you the deadweight loss. Now let's look at a monopolist who can actually perfect price discriminates. In this case, you can see that the profit is given by this very large triangle. Right? This is like very obvious. But what's the implication here on total surplus? So if you write out total surplus obviously equals producer surplus plus consumer surplus. So here, producer surplus is given by this profit. Now, what is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is actually 0. Why? The reason is now we have perfect price discrimination. It means the seller, the monopolist, is charging each customer exactly his willingness to pay. So you can see that for any buyer, right, her willingness to pay equals her price. So this implies for any buyer, her consumer surplus has to be 0. Now this implies for all buyers. If every buyer has consumer surplus, then the total consumer surplus has to be 0, right? So in this case, you can see that total surplus is given by this large triangle, this profit. Now, this total surplus basically is given by, okay, let me use some letters here. Let's say it's A, B, and C. So The total surplus here is given by A plus B. And obviously, if we consider these two large triangles have the same kind of area, let's say I will just name these as ABC. So you can see that total surplus here equals A plus B plus C. So what I can see here, well, it basically means under perfect price discrimination, total surplus is actually larger. Not only it is larger, it's actually efficient. Why it is efficient? Because price equals marginal cost, right? We know that if price equals marginal cost, this market is efficient. So let's summarize, right? So first, under perfect price discrimination, there is no deadweight loss because the monopolist is maximizing total surplus. And then we can also see that consumer surplus is zero. And because consumer surplus is zero, then producer's surplus has to be the same as the total surplus. Right? So essentially, you can see that compared with the case when a monopolist can only charge a single price, perfect price discrimination increases profit, total surplus, and reduces consumer surplus to zero. Okay, now let's talk about second and third degree price discrimination. You can see that perfect price discrimination is most likely a theoretical result. The reason is because it requires the seller to perfectly understand every buyer's willingness to pay and perfectly charges each buyer his willingness to pay. And you can see that it's hard to accomplish this in reality, right? Because it's actually hard to know exactly your customer's willingness to pay. So in reality, price discrimination is actually imperfect. And more realistically, firm will use the following trick, right? The firm will divide customers into different types: young versus old, weekday versus weekend shoppers, business versus leisure travelers. So this is essentially about third degree price discrimination. And then we also have second degree price discrimination. In this case, the monopolist is charging different prices for different units that the customer buys. That is, price changes according to quantity demanded. Now, the definition of third degree price discrimination. Well, if a monopolist is charging a different price to different customers, then this is third degree price discrimination. So let's see one example about third degree price discrimination. So this is about movie tickets, and it's pretty much a real life example. And now, what you can see here is we have two types of customers, right? So we have adult versus child. And what you can see here is adult and child have different demand curve. To be more specific, you can see that in adult market, customers, they are willing to pay higher price. In the economic terminology, it actually means the elasticity in the adult market is lower, or elasticity in the child market is larger. This is quite intuitive, right? It basically means children's, they are more sensitive to movie ticket price changes, well, because they're poor, right? And for adults, they are less sensitive to price changes in the movie tickets market, well, because they are obviously more wealthy compared with their children, right? So now let's say we have we have a monopolist, and it sells movie tickets. So we will now use the two-step process to understand the movie ticket prices it wants to charge in the adult market and in the child market. So let's say this is the marginal cost given by this dashed curve, and you can see, given by this dashed line. What you can see here is obviously in both the adult market and the child market, the marginal cost should be the same, right? Because they're the same kind of product. So we will use the old trick. That is, we will cross marginal revenue with the marginal cost. So this gives us quantity, right? Well, our major focus here is not about quantity. We're looking at the price here. So in the adult market, go upward. We find out PA, which is the price in the adult market. And then in the child market, again, we go upward. Right? We crosses the child demand curve. So we get PC, which is the price in the child market. What you can see here is PA is larger than PC, right? Obviously, the fact PA is larger than PC comes from the monopolist profit maximization behavior. And you can see that the monopolist can do this because the monopolist can separate the TV markets into adult market and child market, right? So basically, you can see that third degree can be achieved when the market can be segmented with different elasticity of demand. So in the end, you can see that in the market with higher elasticity, the monopolist will charge lower price, right? This is very intuitive because children's they're more sensitive to tickets price. So the monopolist will optimally charge lower price. Okay. Now, maybe I should summarize here. I guess I talked about most of these points here, but this last point is worth emphasizing. So, in third degree discrimination, price is lower in the market with more elastic demand. Okay, now let's see some second degree price discrimination example. So these are basically photos taken from Target. And what you can see here is the photo on the left gives you the idea of second degree price discrimination. So you can see that 5 for $5. So here you can see that the price is one. Okay, let me use a different color. So what you can see here is the unit price is $1 for 1 can of soda. Right? Now, if you just buy 1 soda, then you will pay 1.5. So it's 1.25 for 1 can if you buy just 1 can. So this is the second degree price discrimination because it means price changes according to quantity demanded. To be more specific, if you have larger quantity demanded, then your price will be lower. And we have another third degree price discrimination example, right? So you can see that this is a coupon from Big Lots. So it's a US furniture retailer. So you can see here, if you're a college student, you can get $10 off of your purchase, $50, right? So in this case, essentially, this firm separates its market into the market for college kids and the market for non-college people, right? Non-college people. Okay, that's sort of bad name, but I guess You know what I'm saying? So in this case, in the market for college kids, the firm is willing to charge a lower price. And then this children travel for 50% less. Then again, it's the market for adult and the market for children. So for children, the firm is charging a lower price, at least 50% discount. Wow, we have more examples of third-degree price discrimination. So airlines. So there is lower price for travelers staying over a Saturday night. So why this is the third-degree price discrimination? Well, because if you stay over a Saturday night, then it's more likely you're a leisure traveler. Leisure travelers generally want to use cheap tickets, right? Because they cannot get reimbursement. So in this case, airlines will be happy to lower its price for leisure travelers. Discount coupons. So in the case of discount coupons, why this is the third-degree price discrimination? Well, it basically means if you're willing to spend your time to actually collect coupons, then this means you're the type of people who are actually sensitive to product prices. So basically, the firm will be willing to give you lower price through coupons. And then the third case is the university financial aid. So need-based financial aid essentially means if you have some financial difficulties, then you can get a lower price for college education. Right? So this is also a third-degree price discrimination. Okay. The quick quiz asks, how does perfect price discrimination affect consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus? So if we compare perfect price discrimination with the case when the monopolist charges a single price, we know that consumer surplus drops to zero, producer surplus increases, and total surplus increases. To be more specific, it actually increases to the level such that there is no deadweight loss. Right? Essentially, the total surplus will increase to the efficient level of total surplus. Okay, finally, let's talk about policies. What's the motivation for policy? We learned there is generally some kind of inefficiency for a monopolist. So the question now is, how could we regulate these monopolists to reduce its inefficiency? So obviously, the first kind of regulation you can do is you can use some laws, some policies, some government agencies to make monopolized industries more competitive. Right? That is, you want to increase the competitiveness of the market. And second, you can regulate the behavior of the monopolies. And third, you can turn private monopolies into public firms. Fourth, which is interesting, do nothing. That is, let politics stay out of the market. This is basically proposed by a famous economist. You'll see how this works. Okay, so the first way of regulating monopolists is increasing competition with competition laws, right? So for example, in Canada, we have this Competition Bureau, right? It is an agency in the federal government which enforces competition laws. Most likely, these agencies, they will act if there is a merger and acquisition. Merger and acquisition basically means in a certain industry, right? Two firms, they want to merge into one firm. For example, recently, T-Mobile wants to merge with another mobile carrier. So this is a merger. And generally, these competition agencies, these regulating agencies, they don't like merger because if two firms merge into one firm, then this will reduce the number of firms in the market. Generally, this means it will reduce the competitiveness of the market. But you can see that sometimes or a lot of times there is a reason for two firms to merge. At least potentially, if they merge with each other, these two firms' businesses can have some synergies. So potentially, by merging with each other, they can actually have more efficient joint production. So you can see that it is actually a hard job for these regulating agencies because these regulating agencies, they basically have to think about the benefit versus the cost from merger and acquisition. Right? The benefit is there could be some synergies between different firms and production costs could be lower through merger. But the cost is reduced competitiveness in the market, right? So it's actually a very hot problem in politics. Whenever there is a merger, then there could be a merger battle. Then actually the regulating agency will battle with the merged firms in court. They will have to use some lawsuit and they will hire some economists to make their arguments. So generally the economists from the regulate agencies will try to argue that the cost of reduced competitiveness is larger than the benefit. Then the economists from these merged firms will want to argue that the benefit from merging these two firms will be larger compared with its potential cost. So it's actually quite interesting. Okay, now the second one is directly regulating the behavior of monopolists. So the first one is about regulating merger and acquisition, and the second one is directly regulating monopolists' pricing and production behavior. This kind of solution is widely used in the case of natural monopolies, such as water and hydro firms. If the government regulates these firms, then the price can be charged by these natural monopolies are actually set by the government. Now, an important question arises, right? If the government wants to set the price, let's say for water, now what the price should the government set? Well, the first answer looks like the government should set price equals marginal cost, right? Because we learned the total surplus is maximized if price equals marginal cost. And a government should care about total surplus. So from the perspective of economic efficiency, maybe the best solution is just set price equals marginal cost. However, you can see that this is very hard and it's most likely unrealistic. The reason is because this is a natural monopoly. And we understand for a natural monopoly, it has a decreasing average total cost curve, right? You can see that here, the average total cost curve is always decreasing. And we also learned in previous chapters, if a average total cost is decreasing, the marginal cost has to be lower than average total cost. Okay, let me write this down. So if ATC, average total cost, is decreasing, then we must have marginal cost smaller than average total cost. How do you get this? Well, we learned this in the previous chapter that the ATC curve looks like this. And the marginal cost curve crosses the average total cost curve at its lowest point. So it means that on this left side of this picture, you can see that average total cost is decreasing. And indeed, we can see that marginal cost is smaller than average total cost, right? So that's how you get this result, that is by the picture. Now, what's the implication of this result? It implies if the government, right, sets price equals marginal cost, supposedly, this price is the price maximizing total surplus. But you can see that because marginal cost is actually lower than the average total cost, this implies price is lower than average total cost. And we learned profit equals price minus average total cost times quantity. And if price is lower than average total cost, then you would know that the profit has to be negative. And we know that in the long run, if profit is smaller than zero, the firm will actually exit, right? So in the end, right, if the government forces the monopolist to charge a price at marginal cost, the firm will actually try to exit the market. Now, what's the alternatives? Well, there are several alternatives, and you can see that they all have some problems. The first alternative, so let's call this as first, let's say we call this as first alternative solution. The firm can use subsidy, right? For example, let's look at this picture here. Here, the firm sets price equal to marginal cost. That is, we're looking at this point here. Right? This point. Oops. This point. Right? Price equals marginal cost. And you can see that price is actually smaller than ATC. So there is some loss. And now the government can actually ask the firm, hey, what is your loss? If you have a loss of $100 million, then I will give you a subsidy of $100 million. This will offset your loss, right? The government can do this. But what's the potential cost of doing this? The potential cost is if the government wants to increase its budget by providing subsidy to this natural monopoly, the government has to increase its tax. And we know that there is deadweight loss from tax. And we also know that as you increase the size of the tax, then the deadweight loss will be higher. So basically it means that subsidy or government subsidy has its own cost. So what's the second alternative solution? Well, maybe we can do this. We know that if price equals marginal cost, then price will be lower than average total cost, and the firm will want to exit. Maybe we just set price equals average total cost. But you can see that now this has its own problem because we know that ATC is larger than marginal cost. And we know that whenever price is larger than marginal cost, there is some deadweight loss, right? So you can see that by setting price equal average total cost, the firm will not exit and no subsidies needed, but the production, the pricing, both are inefficient. And there is one additional problem if we want to set price equals marginal cost. That is, the monopoly will not have any incentive to reduce cost. Think about this. If the government tells the firm to always set price equal to marginal cost, it means if the firm reduces the marginal cost, then the price it can charge also reduces. So basically, the monopoly will not want to reduce its cost because it implies its profit. Because it implies its price will also be reduced. Now, the third type of regulation is called public ownership. So, rather than regulating a monopoly, right, the government can just run the monopoly itself. So some examples are Canada Post, CBC, Manitoba Hydro. Right? So this is definitely a monopoly. And there are also some costs to this approach. The first is potentially government officials, they don't have the incentive or the talent to run a successful firm. So in this case, taxpayers and consumers, they will lose. Second, potentially government officials themselves, they might get greedy and they will actually become special interest groups to block competition and innovation. That is, maybe in the end, the government will actually want to actively seek for monopoly. Right? The fourth solution is just don't solve it. Right? So this is proposed by George Stiegler. So this guy is a Nobel Prize winner. So he argues that, in my view, the degree of market failure for the American economy is much smaller than the political failure arising from the imperfection of economic policies found in real political systems. So he basically says that politicians or regulators, they're not great at regulating the market. So maybe it's better for them to step aside. Just do not regulate. Right? Okay, now let's end this chapter with this very interesting final question. Price discrimination and time travel. Well, fancy title. Let's say we have 4 people, right? So person A wants to travel back in time to see dinosaurs. So he's willing to pay as much as $200 to use the time machine. And person B wants to relive this entire semester. So she is willing to go back and pay up to $150. And person C, okay, can't wait for the semester to end. So he's willing to pay as much as $125. And student D just wants to get through this class as soon as possible. So she's willing to pay up to $100 to use the time machine. Now let's see the questions. So what are the market price, quantity, and firm's profit if the market is competitive? Second, what are the market price, quantity, and profit if this is a monopoly market? Third, the same question, but we assume if the monopoly can do price discrimination. So let's first find out how could we use these numbers, right? You can see that this is actually a problem with very few numbers. You have only 4 numbers. And what are these numbers? They are willingness to pay. Now, how do you use willingness to pay? Well, I guess the most natural use is to think about demand curve, because we know that demand curve represents marginal buyers' willingness to pay, right? So let's write down these people's willingness to pay and see how can we get demand curve from this. So we have A, B, C, D, 4 people. And A's willingness to pay is 200. For B, it's 150. 125, 100. You can see that this essentially gives you a demand curve, right? So how do you get a demand curve? Let's write down P and Q. So essentially it means if the price is 200, we can sell 1. If it's 150, we can sell 2. If it's 125, we can sell 3. And if it's 100, we can sell 4. Basically, if it's 200, we'll sell only to A. If it's 150, we sell to A and B. And you can go on and you can find out if the price is 100, we can sell to 4 people. Now, what is the market price? So, we actually have, that's pretty weird. I think we actually need some other. Oh, you know what? I actually forget to mention this. The marginal cost of time travel here is 100. So marginal cost here is 100, right? Okay, great. Now, first, if the market is competitive. Well, if the market is competitive, we know that for competitive market, price should be the same as the marginal cost, right? So you can see that by the fact that the marginal cost is 100, we know that price has to be 100. This implies Q should be 4. And this implies profit should be 0. Because price equals marginal cost. Right? Okay, now let's look at the second question. So the second question says, what are the market price, quantity, firm profit if this is a monopoly market? Okay, let me first move the demand curve to the left. So let's copy the demand curve, then we could have more space to work out this problem. So to understand a monopolist's behavior, we have to basically understand at what quantity it maximizes its profit, right? And we understand the condition for this is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. What is marginal cost? It's 100. But what is marginal revenue? Well, we can get marginal revenue from the demand curve. Now, how do we do this? Well, first step, you want to look for the total revenue. So it's 200. It's 300. So what's this number? 375. 400. Now, what is marginal revenue? So at quantity of 1, marginal revenue is 200, right? And then at quantity of 2, it's 100. It's essentially the difference between 200 and 300. And next, at quantity of 3, should be 75. At quantity of 400. So basically, you increase from 3 to 4, you will get additional $25. So it's 25. We want to make sure we find out a quantity at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost, which is 100. So the quantity we should choose here is obviously 2, right? This number. And what is the price? Well, if quantity is 2, price should be 150. What is the profit? So the profit is basically revenue minus the cost. So it's 100, I guess. Yes, it's 100. Okay, finally, let's look at the case when the firm can use perfect price discrimination. In this case, you can see that for the for the first person, right? The firm will charge 200. For the second person, the firm will charge 150. So it's 200 plus this, which is 350. And for the third person, the firm will charge 125. So it's 200 plus this, which is 475. For the last one, it will just charge 100. So it should be 575. Right? So you can see that in the end, the market price will be given by 200, 150, 125, and 100 for each customer. And quantity should be 4. Right? Firm profit would be 575 minus 4 times 100, which is 175. So if you compare these 3 examples, right, you can see that under, let me see, where is this? So you can see that under price discrimination, it can sell 4 trips. Profit is 175. And under competitive market, it will sell 4 trips, but the firm's profit is just 0. So you can see that basically perfect price discrimination is efficient because you sell the same quantity. And you can also see that firm will earn a higher profit using perfect price discrimination. And you can see that for the conventional monopolist who only charges a single price, you can see that in the end, it will only sell 2 trips. And its profit is lower compared with the case under perfect price discrimination. And you can see that because they can only sell 2 trips, so the market quantity is too low. So it is inefficient. Okay, so let me discuss the true-false problem. Okay, so like monopolies, competitive firms choose to produce a quantity in which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is correct for any firm. If it wants to maximize its profit, it has to make sure marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this result holds for any type of firm. For a monopolist, marginal revenue is often greater than the price it charges for the good. Well, this is incorrect. It's actually less. The reason is because for a monopoly, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But we know that marginal revenue is actually larger than the price. Oh, not. It's in. Okay, sorry. But we know that marginal revenue is actually smaller than its price. So price is often larger than the marginal revenue, or you should say marginal revenue is often less than the price it charges for the good. Oh, by the way, you get this because we know that if this is demand, this is total revenue. You can see that total revenue is often below the demand curve. So total revenue is always smaller compared with price. 3, the amount of power that a monopoly has is a function of whether there are close substitutes for its product. I have not officially discussed about this, but you can see that it's pretty much common sense, right? So it should be true. It means that even if you're a monopolist, if there is a product which is very close to your product, you can imagine that your market power will be lower because of this potential competition. By selling hardcover books to die-hard fans and paperback to less enthusiastic readers, the publisher is able to price discriminate and raises its profit. So you can see this is actually true, right? Because we know that hardcover books are always more expensive and paperback cheaper. Despite these two types of covers will give you the same kind of content, right? But why the publisher is doing this? Well, because if you're the die-hard fans, you have higher willingness to pay, and you're happy to get a better covered book, right? So you will buy hardcover book and buy at a higher price. So this is correct. 5th, movie theaters charge different prices to different groups of people based on different marginal cost that exist from group to group. It is not. We talk about this. Essentially, people are just the consumers. So it does not make sense to talk about marginal cost, right? We should talk about their demand curve. More specifically, we should talk about elasticities. Right. So basically, this happens because different types of people, they have different elasticities. By offering lower price to customers who buy a large quantity, a monopoly is price discriminating. Well, this is correct. This is the exact definition of second-degree price discrimination. During the life of a drug patent, the monopoly pharmaceutical firm maximizes its profit by producing the quantity at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Well, this is like obvious, right? Because it is maximizing its profit. And we know that this only happens if marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is true. Declining average total cost with increased production is one of the defining characteristics of a natural monopoly. So this is correct because we know that if we have a natural monopoly, then its ATC curve is always declining, right? So this is true. University financial aid can be viewed as a type of price discrimination. So this is the example we discussed in the lecture note. Basically, if you have some financial difficulties, it means you have lower willingness to pay to college education. So by offering you some need-based financial aid, your price paid for college education will be lower. So this is a type of price discrimination. When a monopoly charges a higher price, fewer of its goods are sold. Well, this is definitely true. Okay, the reason is because for a monopolist, it faces a downward sloping demand curve. So if the price is higher, right, its quantity will be lower. So you can see that the quantity Q2 here is lower compared with Q1. Average revenue for a monopoly is the total revenue divided by quantity produced. This is definitely correct because that's the definition of average. So average revenue equals total revenue divided by quantity. This clearly holds for any type of firm, either it's competitive firm or a monopoly firm. Okay, great. That's for today's class.